I'm not sure if it's looking small on my screen. Yep, there we are, a little bit bigger there.
I think the recording started even though I didn't hear the voice go,
Okay.
because I have pause and stop. So I think we're recording. Yep, we're recording. Okay, so Gretchen, I will hand it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. My name's Gretchen Haupt. I use she, her pronouns. I am an evaluation associate at the Science Museum of Minnesota, and I will give my co-presenters an opportunity to introduce themselves when they talk a little bit about their organizations. But this is going to track very closely to a presentation that we did at the Visitor Studies Association conference this past July, which was right here in St. Paul. It was a lovely opportunity to showcase some area regional work that we've been doing with our COVES data. And so we've got myself, Annika Taylor from the Bakken, Summer Scheringhausen from the Bell Museum, and Michael Foylad Olson from Minneapolis Institute of Art. This particular collaboration, and it has also included the Walker Art Center, but there is a staffing transition. And so while that gets worked out, we're not necessarily going to be highlighting their specific results, their specific data points in here, but might make some broad comparisons where we're trying to show there might be something going on between art museum audiences and science museum audiences. So as I said, this information that's presented on the upcoming slides is collected by 4 Twin Cities organizations. The Walker is participating. And I'm gonna go ahead and let Annika do a quick intro, and then we'll move through to the Bell, to the MIA, and then I'll talk a little bit about the Science Museum context, and then we'll kind of kick off into where did this collaboration come from.
Hello, folks. I'm Annika Taylor. I'm the Vice President of Learning at the Bakken Museum, which means in classic small museum form, I have about 13 different jobs, and one of them is kind of evaluation and audience management stuff. But the Bakken is, as I said, a small museum located in Minneapolis. It's a museum of innovation, so more in the STEM science museum realm than others, but we do like to think of ourselves as focusing on a lot of different things. We're a little bit of the odd duck participant in this endeavor, in that we were when we started this, not actually members of COVES, but we had our demographic survey was designed by a COVES person and very closely mimicked the same questions. So our data was fairly easy to marry with everyone else's. In very exciting news, we obtained a grant, which is allowing us to officially join COVES starting sort of tail end of the summer, beginning of the fall, which we're really excited about. I probably should have reviewed these slides again since our presentation before we did this, because I don't actually remember what I was talking about. But I think that's enough for intro, probably.
Whoops, I went too far. There we are. Summer, if you want to pop on and talk a little bit about context at the Bell Museum.
Hi, my name is Summer Scheringhausen. I use she, her pronouns. I am the public program assistant at the Bell Museum. So I also have kind of a broad, like here and there kind of a role, which is why it fit well for kind of some of the coordinating for the COVE surveys. But it's not just me, myself at the museum doing that. I work with the visitors services people and also with our marketing team. And our gallery programs team. So it's a collaborative effort at the Bell Museum to do our COVES stuff. We are a natural history museum. I've got our general admission there, about 95,000 for the year. And that's in the museum is 69% of that. So we have a statewide team that goes and does the Bell Museum all over Minnesota. So.
And Michael at the Minneapolis Institute of Art.
Yeah, Hi there, my name is Michael Folliard Olson. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm one of the visitor experience managers here at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I oversee the data collectors. So the visitor experience department does the data collection on that end of things. And we just brought in a new data analysts who will be helping support as well.
And as I said, I'm Gretchen. I'm at the Science Museum, and we're a pretty, dyed-in-the-wool science and technology center. We have our fiscal 23 attendance. We haven't updated it for fiscal 24, working on that. Our non-school audiences are just under 400,000, and our total audience is about 500,000 in fiscal 23. We also have a pretty significant collection of objects, and we do have active scientific research going on as well. So just a little context about the scope of these organizations that we are comparing our audience data to. And Annika, if you feel comfortable kind of going into the sort of project background that you had shared at VSA, it can be pretty light touch, just about how did this group come together and sort of what were we hoping to do with our shared data?
Sure. This group sort of evolved out of a collection of people who were sort of meeting more casually. Initially, it was formed by some folks at MIA and at SMM, neither of whom are at those institutions anymore. But all of the folks in the Twin Cities who were using COVES or COVES-like instruments started having breakfast once a quarter to talk about the work of it. And in those conversations, we sort of realized we had this unique opportunity with all of us gathering data with the same or similar instruments to potentially put that data together and allow us to understand a little bit more what the museum going audience of our entire metro area was when we looked at all of ours in combination, as well as to understand a little bit how our individual institution might play a specific role in that space. So sort of understanding the collective work of inviting all of our different populations to all of our different institutions, but also the individual work that our specific institutions could still do in relation to each other. I think this was meant to just be a little bit of an experiment of a beginning to see what we might be able to make happen and what we might get out of it. And very much when we started, and I think in an ongoing way, the hope is that maybe there's even more to build from this in terms of ways that we can understand what we as a collection of museums are doing, as well as what we as individual institutions are trying to do.
Thanks. Thank you, Annika. So I'm just gonna hold the mic for a while and talk a lot about the process and the information and the results, because I know that's what most people here really what a lot of people here want to dig into. But what data are we looking at? If this is all collected either through COVES, the COVES process with the COVES instrument, or a COVES-like set of demographic questions. And in the information presented here is collected between July 1st of 2021 and June 30th of 2023. And since this was our first attempt at aggregating and exploring this data, we started with the lower hanging fruit along with what we knew was going to be comparable. And as we move through the slides, all but one category, education, represents the time period of fiscal year 2023, acknowledging that the Bakken is on a different fiscal year schedule. I think they run along with the calendar year, and that they were using a similar enough instrument, but there's a couple of places where we had to massage it. We're hoping eventually we'll have really nice, clean, easily comparable data. And if you ever want to have a virtual coffee with me, I will tell you all about my data cleaning adventures. But on these slides, we're going to be looking at location, comparing the greater Minneapolis-St. Paul area versus the greater Minnesota area and beyond. The group type, so adults versus adult-only groups versus multi-generational. Disability was there somebody in the group present or absent in the visiting group? Age of respondents only. Race, ethnicity as it compares with our Twin Cities census data, education, and household income as it compares with larger Twin Cities demographic data. It's really important to note that the information on the following slides only represents one bucket of each organization's audience. This is on-site general visitors. This is who COVES samples. So it's important to know that this is not comprehensive description of any of these participating in institutions' audiences. So while visitors described here likely engage with each organization in multiple ways, the comparisons we're talking about will not include K-12 audiences, so both field trips and outreach. It doesn't include theater, any digital engagement, group purchases, other offsite programming, rentals, special events, and lots of other pockets of audiences that we engage with. And so I just want to be really clear, we're really looking at one like on-site museum visitorship. And COVES is currently offered only in English and Spanish, so it's important to recognize that visitors who are more comfortable responding in another language are likely underrepresented. And this data can only represent visitors who are comfortable engaging with data collectors and providing responses to questions about their identity in the first place. So there is quite a few, as you know, most people, this is a voluntary survey, and people can opt out of responding to individual questions. And then, of course, there are some site-specific contexts that influence collection methodology, which might obscure some on-site audience segments, such as the location of data collection. The Science Museum of Minnesota has one exit and entrance, and so it's a lot easier to accurately sample who's coming and going. But the Walker Art Institute has the sculpture garden and the building, so like where and when things get sampled, timing of data collection, and such as the ability to collect at events, and just general variation in data collector capacity and training. So these are just all some important context and caveats when we're looking at the data. So zip codes that are provided by survey respondents were used to determine if the respondent was from the greater Minneapolis St. Paul area, which is comprised of the 15 counties in blue and green on the map. Or are they from greater Minnesota, which is beyond, and that also includes any out-of-state or international visitors. We use the greater Minneapolis statistical area, which is a designation from the census data and the American Community Survey, which is what we use to compile all of our demographic comparisons. So our big picture takeaways here are that the Walker's data, which isn't pictured here, but I think it's an important thing to call on, shows that they get the most out of town visitors, and helps kind of elucidate this pattern of art museums drawing a larger proportion of visitors from outside of the immediate geographic area. And moving through these slides, the blue shades are the science museums, and the orange shade, or when we have this as a full data set, orange shades are art museums. The Science Museum of Minnesota specifically sits somewhere between the art and science cohorts. As you can see, it's equally distant from MIA or the Bakken. Each group is also asked how many children they are visiting with on that particular day. And respondents who say 0 are recoded or considered adult-only groups. And those who reported 1 or more children are considered multi-generational or multi-gen. Groups who don't provide any answer are considered unknown and are not included in the calculations for this presentation. So the big picture takeaway from this analysis, it's pretty easy to see, and it tracks really closely with the COVES aggregates, is that the art museums seem to have a much larger proportion of adult-only groups visiting than science museums, and overall the proportion of adult-only audiences is similar across each of the cohorts. So Bakken, Bell, SMM have a similar proportion of adult-only visitors as Mia and the walker have a similar proportion. When respondents were asked if anyone in their group has a permanent or temporary disability, and those who report yes are invited to indicate the types of disability that are reflected in their group on that particular day. What is showing up here is that the science museums maybe are seeing a slightly larger number of groups where someone has a disability compared to art museums, but overall it is fairly similar. Looking down at the bottom, and it might be kind of small on your screen, mobility is the most common type of disability reported across all organizations. And there's still a bit of variation between. So for example, about half of groups that include someone with a disability at the Bell include someone with a mobility disability, compared to closer to just a third at SMM. So that's this lower, I don't know if my cursor, yeah, it's gonna track very well. It's all the way on the left of the lower. For this initial analysis, only the age of respondent was considered. In the future, analyses could consider ages of the rest of the group, which is information that is collected by COVES. And I had to kind of stray away from my blues or science museums, oranges are art museums, to be able to do this nice area chart. But the art museums likely have an overall younger visiting audience than science museums. And this might be related to group composition. So if adult-only groups tend to be younger adults who haven't had children yet, that could account for some of the differences. The age distribution peaks at about 25 to 34 for art museums, where most of the science museums peak at the 35 to 45 age. That could also be a reflection of who is having kids and when, and who are raising children and having so those two things could be related. The Bell Museum's respondents are at this point an intriguing outlier, with a peak at the 65 plus age range. And if I recall correctly from VSA, and Summer can talk about this a little later, is that a lot of this fiscal 23 data was collected via email survey, and they hadn't fully transitioned back to on-site data collection. And if you have been in these calls for a while, you might remember a poster that I presented at the Omaha VSA talked about the ways that the methodology in which the surveys are collected can influence the demographics of who responds, or their relationships. And so perhaps respondents who are getting emails are more likely to be responding. It could oversample members, but for this particular respondent set, there's the 65 and up shows up a lot more frequently at the Bell Museum. So subsequent analyses might explore if these age distributions reflect multi-generational groups, so grandparents with their grandchildren, or adult only. But I just think this is fascinating to sort of see these trends and patterns. COVES respondents are permitted to check all race ethnicity categories that apply to them. And this analysis presented here omits respondents who decline to answer or skip the question. And then we recoded the responses into categories that match census data, so that we can compare distributions to our local Minneapolis-St. Paul statistical area, which is that kind of like gray step that represents the Twin Cities in general. And somebody had a really great question at VSA, and I think for a next stage of analysis, we might do this, is the data reported here for race ethnicity is reflective of all visitors. So it is not just a comparison of Twin Cities visitors to the Twin Cities demographic. This is saying of our general visiting audience, which might include people from Florida and might include people from Europe. This is not, so I think it's still a good comparison to say who's showing up in the building. And does that reflect our demographics locally? But I think it's a fascinating examination to really kind of like hone in on how well are we representing from our local visitors, our local community. But the big picture takeaway is that there doesn't appear to be a pattern in race ethnicity based on science or art museum cohorts when we look at a more aggregate BIPOC audience. But African American or Black audiences shown at the bottom, broken out by individual selections, and this is a single select, it does appear to substantially be unrepresented across all organizations. So there's a lot of variation in regards to respondents who identify as Asian. At the Bakken, there's 13% compared to 5% at MIA. So there's a lot of variation there, but when you get to the African American or Black, none of these organizations are really reaching representation of the general community. The education options did differ between art and science museums between their instruments, and that's been adjusted moving forward in fiscal 25. But the primary difference in the charts is that the art museum surveys don't include an option for some graduate work, and those respondents for this analysis were included with the college degree category. So this data here reflects the respondents' highest level of education, and fiscal 22 data is what we're using because of the Bakken's fiscal 23 data wasn't as complete as the rest of the other organizations. So we wanted to kind of keep those ends higher. But a big picture takeaway, not a surprise. All 5 organizations have highly educated audiences, and almost 3/4 or above are reporting respondents with a bachelor's degree or higher. A little bit of variation in the higher, upper graduate degrees. Unsurprising that Bell Museum, half of their respondents have a graduate degree or higher. But across the main breakdown, the orange of no bachelor's degree in blue is not surprising. And respondents who declined to answer, again, were not included in calculations for household income. And the COVES categories were then further condensed in order to compare to census data for the greater Minneapolis area. And then we did then further bucket them to be these 3 sort of like low, middle, and higher income. And we chose the 100,000 or more as higher income because that's a general reflection of median income in the Twin Cities area. But big picture takeaway, the art museums seem to track closer to income distributions for our geographic area, and whereas science museums underrepresent audiences with lower household incomes and overrepresent households with the highest incomes.
I think, Gretchen, something important to note there is MIA is also a free museum with no entrance fee, and that might impact also the, we don't have another comparison in our group of another free museum, and that might impact this as well.
Yes, and also and I'm not explicitly showing the Walker's data here, but they also have a free, the sculpture garden, I believe, has free admission, and so some of their respondents might also not have that particular access concern when they're coming to visit and respond to the survey. But yes, that says we're going to kind of move into like what does this mean for each organization. So just a quick recap is like this is all very preliminary analysis. We're just sort of exploring what comparisons are there to make and what are we seeing, what's rising to the top. We're bringing this to decision makers in our organizations and sort of thinking about like, what does this mean? But not a whole lot has happened since we've started socializing this with our organizations. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what we're thinking about. But first, I want to stop. Are there any clarifying questions or about the data and the initial findings that I presented? You can like, I haven't been keeping track of chat, but if you want to just come off mute and ask, I'm happy for that. All right. Feel free to chime in later if you want. We're going to go ahead and move on to what's going on at the Bakken.
Sorry, I'm being pulled in a few different directions
Oh,
at the
no.
moment. So one of the reasons this is really exciting for us is the Bakken is in the middle of a 3-year grant doing evaluation capacity building through IMLS. And so this is one of the big components of it is trying to build more of a practice in our organization of finding data and using data to understand as well as storytell about who we are and the work we're doing, as well as the work we want to be doing. So a big part of this is sort of looking at all the different departments in the organization and trying to understand what people are curious about and what they want to know about. And this is one of the data sets that we've brought to the table to have people start to see if they can answer some of the questions that they have from some of our different departments. I think we also brought this to the board. We gave our board members a chance to just take an initial glance at this data and use it to develop some questions and thoughts that they had as well. Specifically, the things that have risen out of this a lot is just trying to understand who the Bakken is situated within the museum world of the Twin Cities, and then push a little harder on if that's who we want to be, and where we would like to see ourselves going. But I think the other big thing that was noted both within our staff and with our board is just sort of excitement about the museum community in the Twin Cities, thinking more broadly about itself as a whole identity and how we could work together and think about how we could have sort of stronger impact as an entire local ecosystem of museums beyond just the work that we do on our own. Yeah, I think that's enough to say for now.
So then at the Bell Museum, I want to first just echo what Annika was saying is that part of the reason that we were excited about being part of this cohort was to kind of take that collaborative approach to museums in the Twin Cities. And it can be kind of scary to just share your data with each other, and just be worried about, what does it look like? And but it's been a good learning opportunity, I think, for all of us to kind of look at what makes our area unique and then to work together on what these numbers mean for each of us. One kind of unique thing that came about for the Bell unintentionally was that something that Gretchen kind of mentioned is that the data we're looking at in these slides was during a time where the Bell was only collecting surveys via email. So that meant that a lot of the people answering our surveys at that point were either members or highly engaged visitors that we had a lot of connection with already. And so now that we've got another year almost of in-person data collection, it's kind of interesting to look at how the email data collection has differed from the in-person data collection. And so that's a little bit what's on this slide. And some of the things that the data has brought up for us and things that we are asking and looking at is one, the multi-generational groups. And so on this graph, the blue bar is our Bell Museum data collected through email surveys. The orange bar is our also Bell Museum data, but collected through in-person surveys. And then kind of the overall Twin City cohort of science museums and what theirs look like. So you can see for some questions, it seems to make a difference. And for some questions, it doesn't. But yeah, we've been asking questions about multi-generational groups. That's a huge thing for us of who's coming to the museum. It's also a lot of what we market. when we first looked at education level, and we were a little bit surprised by the high level of education that respondents were reporting, wondering, you know, does this because we're connected to the University of Minnesota? Is this because, you know, we seem unapproachable to people without a higher level of education? And then being part of the cohort kind of gave us the opportunity to see that while we still have those questions, it's a thing that we're seeing across the museums in our area. And then also just race and ethnicity, that was one that made a big difference for our email surveys versus our in-person. And then visitors' experience and accessibility. When our museum, we have a newer building. We are more than 150 years old as a museum, but our building is much newer. And accessibility, physical accessibility to the exhibits and galleries and even the outdoor learning landscape was a huge focus in the design. And so now looking at our data, we're able to kind of see how effective that has been in our visitors.
I don't think so. I think it's probably, I think there's a bunch of it that is sitting with me and that you'll need more information from me.
Okay, so for Mia, as a visitor experience manager, my perspective really comes from that visitor experience perspective. What we really lean into in our department is the Net Promoter Score and the overall experience rating, because those are the things that, as the greeters at the front door, as the contact center and first contact for the visitor communicating to the museum, that's what we have the most influence on or impact on. But for the museum as a whole, we use the data in many, many different ways. We want to exceed our pre-pandemic highest year. So we're really on the 4 to 6 year plan to get there. And we use this data to really help support that growth back to closer to 1 million visitors at our museum. Because our key year was 2018, and we want to get back to that close to 1 million visitors. We are using this information to really elevate what programs we're adding and expanding upon based on the demographics, really trying to reach more communities within our community and seeing what the other museums are doing and what other museum communities are, helps us to understand what communities are wanting to engage with the museum and how can we communicate or make them make them feel welcome here at MIA. And same thing, so diversity, equity, and inclusion and community outreach is a big part of that. We have a global collection. And so how are we tapping into all the different communities within the Minneapolis market is a big way of how we're using this information.
So at the Science Museum of Minnesota, we've been sampling our on-site general audience via some manner of ongoing visitor survey of visitor experiences, motivations, and demographics since 2016. And like at MIA, our visitor experience department pays really close attention to Net Promoter Score, to overall experience rating, and a lot of the other quantitative experience rating questions. And they will utilize, we often use the COVES data to test theories and measure the impacts of some of that program strategy. And demographic information is also a key part and important to our visitor experience, as well as both our outreach departments and our development departments. And for example, like asking questions around, are different groups having different experiences, and what could be done to remedy that because if we're doing a lot of work to market and reach different audiences, then are we actually living up to that expectation once people come in through the door? Getting a good sense of what our current audience looks like and how do we grow certain segments and how do we engage and what are our goals for growth? And so as Summer and Annika and Michael alluded to, like there are things that we've seen as challenges within individual organizations, such as the higher education levels and not really representing lower income or individuals with less than a bachelor's degree. And a lot of these are actually challenges for museums in general. I don't think anybody really questioned that, but we know that as, you know, as museum people, but sometimes we have to be able to tell that story to people who aren't as in the weeds about that. So I know at the Science Museum in Minnesota, we're shifting gears and doing a lot of effort to better engage our adult-only audiences. And being a part of this collaboration, it's possible to sort of share and compare notes on what is maybe happening, what's going on at art museums that is doing a really good job of engaging adult-only audiences or, you know, younger adult audiences. And so this is not necessarily a question of being in competition, because we are part of an ecosystem of people who are likely to go to museums. And I think learning from each other about what is working and what innovations and are resulting in the changes that we want to see is really helpful. And like Summer said, that it can be really scary. And so we started with some of these more basic demographic descriptors that maybe, you know, like as a zero entry into sharing information about what's going on and what might be going into these things. So this was originally for a larger discussion in a large conference room, but want to pose some questions to the COVES COP. You know, we hear from evaluators and in general, and we hear about that they understand the data, but how are we getting it out to our organization? Looking at regionally aggregated data in contrast to the full COVES aggregate. Are there other possible regional cohorts that could form? What are the benefits and challenges that would come from creating a cohort in your geographic area? How could this be beneficial? What would make it worth it? What are some things for you to consider before, during, or after? One of the things that enabled this was that we had a cluster of institutions using COVES or COVES adjacent instrument, and the density of the organizations using that. It doesn't make it as easily replicable, but our shared audience as museum visitors is what brought us together as well. So when you're thinking about what other organizations in the COVES COP or in that other networks that you're part of, you might reach out to and share across markets who have similar demographics or similar strategic goals. What are other cohorting that is not just geographic? So, and finally, it's exciting for us. What's exciting about this for you and possibly for your institution? So I'm gonna go ahead and take the screen share down and just open up for conversation for the last 5 to 10 minutes.
I have a question, just to get us started. I'm wondering what advice you would give to any other cohort that wants to start something like this, but isn't sure exactly where to get started or what to do first or what they might need to watch out for.
I'll start I got brought in sort of like in the early middling area to do a lot of the number data cleaning and wrangling. But I think the advice is that it's okay to start really small, maybe with 1 or 2 data points that are of interest. Like you don't have to jump into all the things. And I think it's okay to go in not having any hypotheses, just sort of seeing what emerges out. And so that's my advice coming from just raw numbers. I don't sit positionally in the organization to have as much context about things to keep in mind when you are messaging and socializing this with decision makers. So I would leave that to other members of the presenters to kind of speak to that. I know that is a thing, you know, we were very conscious and careful of, and getting permission and walking people through, like, what does this mean? How are we using this? What is kind of like a vague plan for how to make this how to have like a utilization focus.
Yeah, I would agree with that and just say that the actual sharing data is something that's fairly new to the group. There was a long period of kind of trust building and collaborating in a more conversational way. And so this actual like laying out the data in front of us didn't come right at the beginning.
Someone who's newer to the group, I've only been to 2 of the meetings, and I'm fairly new to the group. For me, it's been nice to come in at this point and see that there's a realization that we all share the same audience and same goal for our audiences in a very similar way. Even though we're science museums and history museums and art museums, we have different things that we provide. So it takes down the stigma of competition for us, or at least it has for me, going, okay, we are all providing or servicing a greater audience that's very similar. How can we give them all the best experience and have them overlap with one another because of our proximity, which is really kind of exciting.
There's also a question from Alyssa in the chat. I would love to know how the museums found the correct people to connect with in order to start the coffee chats. Sounds like Alyssa's reached out to a couple local museums, but hasn't really gotten anywhere without like knowing the right person to contact.
I want to say that like some of the original relationships, I mean, these go back like 5, 6, 7 years. There's a group with a really unfortunate an anagram that the Twin Cities cultural something at tickle cough. But there was like a group of Twin Cities cultural organizations that would meet on a quarterly basis, who are not all evaluation. They come from different roles. And I think so some of those just those connections pre-existed. And I think VSA might be a good place to start, as in we're connecting with other people who do visitor studies. But as you might have noticed when we were presenting, is like I work in visitor, evaluation and research. Michael is in visitor experience. It's sort of like zeroing in on who has access to or is already gathering information about the people who are coming. Like it might be in marketing, it might be in public relations, it might be in visitor, it could be in your education department if they're the people who are sort of like that nascent, like who are we reaching and why. It could be in your government relations because you have to report to if you get funding from the state. So yeah, I don't have, I think it's, yeah, I think I would I get where you're saying though, like, oh, I don't know who to broach this conversation with, but I think it's kind of finding who's using the information and pitching it to them, as in this could be a really, useful collaboration between our 2 organizations.
I would recommend like all those things that Gretchen just listed, like try them all and try them specifically until you find the right one, because it is so different at different places. And something that I found a little bit intriguing is that in many institutions, if somebody isn't the person, they don't know who the person is. And so it's hard to like get forwarded. So it's just like if it doesn't work in a visitor services, try try marketing. If it doesn't, and then if it doesn't work in marketing, you know, it's going to take a little time and a little bit of a slog, but I think it makes sense to just throw as many lines out as you can, and ask if people know who the right person is. But I've also been pointed to the wrong person at a couple of organizations because it seems like sometimes there's not a lot of internal knowledge about where that sits.
I think something that's good to do too, once you have the, once it's started, Mia did a good job by passing the torch on to me and including or inviting me in, even though I went blindly to the first meeting and met everyone for the first time there. If you get it up and going, keep it going, keep those connections, and don't be afraid to share the connections with other people within your institution as well, so that you've built that relationship.
Jenny, I think I saw your hand. Is that right?
Yes, I'm just fascinated with the connections of, I was wondering if everyone is from the same city or just that small regional area, if it's larger than a city area. And it would be neat to have something like that kind of connection with people in the Memphis area. I just think it's very cool. And how do you go about finding out who else is doing the Cove survey in your area to form those type of relationships?
We're all in either Minneapolis or St. Paul, so we're in that very like close metropolitan area. And I think, you know, I'm working on getting the Minnesota Historical Society like on board, get them to do coves too. And there's a couple of other like Twin Cities, but like there's potential for like the Children's Museum in Duluth or a lot of other places. But so it is not, you know, there's not as many like geographic locations where you're going to have a large metro area supporting multiple organizations using coves. But I do think, and Alex can probably find the link faster than I can, there's a really lovely interactive map on the Coves website that indicates all of the institutions that are currently active in coves. So you could, you know, poke around on that map and see either regionally or the list of organizations, and then maybe scope out some individuals to reach out to.
And if they're Coves participants already, like, I don't know, Alyssa, if the folks you were emailing are or not Coves participants, but our team is always able to facilitate that. If you feel like you don't know the person to reach out to, we can say, here's the Coves person at that institution, or here's our main contact there. So that's like easy mode if they're already in Coves and you can kind of grab them. If it's a matter of sort of like convincing them, roping them in, we can still help with that, but it's going to be like a little different. But if anyone feels like they see another museum or museums nearby and you just don't know who to talk to, like, we can totally help with that.
Thank you guys. I'm sorry, I missed some of that because my computer kicked me off. Sorry.
Oh, I was just remarking on, Alex dropped in the chat a link for the Coves participants. So you can search that and find who's in your geographic area, or just having a list. Maybe it's someone across the country that would be a good cohort for your particular organization. And I also want to put out there that if anyone wants, you know, thoughts, support, information on like just the behind the scenes of how I aggregated information and made things talk to each other, I'm always happy to do that too. And I've proposed to Alex, I would love to do like a hack your dashboard COP call, like how to make widgets work for you as a practitioner with the dashboard. So yeah, I'll drop my Gmail, my work email in here, and anyone feel free to reach out if you've got particular data wrangling questions related to making Coves data talk to each other.
Hello, I'm Caroline from the Farnsworth Art Museum in Maine. And I'm wondering, we've only been doing this for about 5 months, and we just got data, the aggregated data sent to us, which I haven't even actually seen yet, and I'm the one doing all of the surveys, 100% pretty much. It was my understanding that Coves is sharing data with among other museums. Is that correct, or is that something we have to decide to collaborate with somebody on?
Alex can definitely talk to the Coves aggregate board, but the difference for what we're doing here in the Twin Cities is we're sharing our data and we know individually like what each organization's specifics are. So we've sort of like taken the DNI, it's no longer anonymous by organization. The aggregate dashboard is all anonymous.
There may be a distinction that you're thinking of too with the Art Bridges partnership. With art museums that are supported by the Art Bridges Foundation, there's a little bit of a difference with the data sharing. So they, in their sort of like sponsoring of different museums participating, they see everything. If you've agreed to share, they see everything de-anonymized, so they can see, you know, this is Portland Art Museum, this is Farnsworth, this is Memphis Brooks, etc. But it's not by default shared across museums in that de-anonymized way. But what Gretchen said is true. Like the aggregate dashboard, it's aggregate. And so even though you can kind of filter down even and say, I just want to look at museums in my region that are this size, etc., you're never going to be able to sort of pinpoint any individual museum. But what the Twin Cities Collaborative has done is said, like, we're gonna, like, this is Bell Museum and this is our numbers, and we're sharing it all de-anonymized. But there is a slight difference with the Art Bridges sort of setup, which might be a little bit of what you're thinking of. But
Okay, yeah, that's who
on the
we
aggregate.
have done it through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Highly encouraged to sort of share across in a de-anonymized way, but it's not something that like we decide to do on anyone's behalf. We would never do it without anyone's permission. And also the Twin Cities Collaborative sort of signed a little, I don't think it was too onerous of an agreement together, but a little sort of like memorandum of understanding about not, you know, doing anything crazy with the data, but just sort of all going in with good faith and using it for better understanding, just to kind of be on the same page, literally the same Word document page. Well, I'm just noticing it's 1:59, so we should probably wrap up so folks can get to their next meetings. So I want to just give a huge thank you to Gretchen, Annika, Michael, and Summer for sharing the data. You know, de-anonymizes all the rest of the Coves community as well. And, you know, highly encouraged if you see other museums, even if they're not in your direct city, if they're close enough in your region, we'd love to support more collaboratives like this and use this model to, you know, grow more of this sharing effort if it's something of interest to folks. And just to preview next month, I think we're going to be talking about some aggregate data. If Ryan and I can wrangle it into an appropriate state, we'll be sharing some information for our first real aggregate report since COVID, which is super exciting for us, and we hope exciting for you as well. So we can't wait to see you next month, and thanks for joining us on our JulAugust webinar. Thanks again to the Twin Cities folks. See you guys next month.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye-bye.